Okay,
So
so good morning. Today's daf is daf
respond.
kaf dalid in Menachot. We are back a little bit. We had to stop a little bit early yesterday, so I'll help us catch up. Let me share my screen, and we'll get really started. So the yesterday we saw a Mishnah that detailed three rules regarding the mixing of two Menachot if they get mixed up before the kamitza. So then, as long as one can do kamitza from each of the piles separately with no contamination, so then the kamitzas that you do, you take them and they'll be kosher and you'll be able to offer them. Otherwise, it's all going to be invalid. If a komitz gets mixed with a mincha pre-kamitza, and again, assuming that there's no way to take to get it out without spoiling it, meaning that they're actually mixed together, unlike in the first case. Well, you can't burn it on the altar because the pre-kamitza mincha is not ready for the altar, and you're not supposed to burn something on the altar that isn't commanded to be burned. But if you did so then the kometz that already was taken counts, but the pre-kamitza mincha does not. And then if the rule number three, if a kometz gets mixed with the remnants of another mincha, again, one's not allowed to burn it on the altar because the remnants are not supposed to be burned on the altar, and the remnants are for the kohanim to eat. But if one did so again, the kometz is going to count. Now, with that as background, the Gemara then gave the opinions of Rav Chisda and Rabbi Chanina because it was going to use the three cases of our Mishnah in order to try and support one or the other, or to try and conflict with both of them. So Rav Chisda says that in order for one piece of meat to be nullified in the two other pieces of meat, the two pieces must not be able to become like the nullified piece. Meaning, there's this concept of min bimino. And when we say that min bimino eino batal. When we say that, what we're really saying is that when two things are virtually identical or capable of being identical, we're not going to allow one to nullify the other. And here they're focusing on the halacha components, meaning that the halacha of the two if the halacha of the two can effectively be the same, then we're going to say that it's min bimino and it's eino batal. But if in fact they're always going to be different, well, then it's going to be considered nullified. Then you have the possibility of nullification because when you have two different things, so then the predominant one can nullify the other. But when you have, as the famous Ran in Nidarim points out, right, when you have two things that are too similar, they end up enhancing one another rather than conflicting. And so as a result, you don't actually undermine and there won't be any nullification. And so Rav Chisda says that in order to determine whether two things are identical, you look at whether the things that are the predominant, meaning the thing that's the majority, whether that could become like the minority. And so even if the minority could become like the majority, we're still going to say that the majority, which can't be like the minority, is going to nullify it. And what's the example? The example that he gives is that if you have one piece of nevela that's mixed with two pieces of slaughtered meat, it's going to become nullified, but not vice versa. Why? Because, meaning that if you have one piece of slaughtered meat among two pieces of nevela, the one piece of slaughtered meat is not going to be mixed in with, is not going to be considered nevela. We're not going to consider the whole thing to be nevela. Why? Because the slaughtered pieces cannot become nevela, right? It's slaughtered. It can't become nevela. It's not going to become something that wasn't shechted properly. So it's min b'she'eno mino. But nevela, now you might think, how can nevela become slaughtered meat? It can be because what we're focused on right now is the question of tuma. And so as a result, nevela can be like slaughtered meat because although nevela is tameh, when a dead animal is tameh, it's going to be considered tahor when it spoils, because it is only going to be tameh when it is edible, when it is appropriate eating for somebody who isn't Jewish. And so as a result, it's going to lose its tumah status and become tahor, just like the slaughtered meat. And so as a result, if you have one piece of slaughtered meat in two pieces of nevela, it's not going to be nullified. But if you have one piece of nevela in two pieces of slaughtered meat, it is going to be nullified. Meaning that if you were to touch the even if you were to touch all three pieces, arguably, you were to touch all three pieces, and again, the one piece is tameh, there would be no ramifications on you. Or you have some piece of food that touches that, there are no ramifications on the piece of food that it will be tameh. And so as a result, that's the ramification, and that's Rav Chisda's perspective, meaning focus on the nullifiers, on the mevatel. That's what we're going to focus on. Rabbi Chanina says, no, you focus on the batel. That it's the exact opposite of what Rav Chisda. In order for one piece of meat to be nullified in two other pieces, the one piece must not be able to become like the nullifiers. Meaning, so that therefore one piece of slaughtered meat does become nullified by two pieces of nevela, and if you touch any of them, if you with a piece of food, that piece of food becomes a sheni l'tuma, and so as a result, that's the situation where we're going to say nullification. We're going to say no nullification, and it's the opposite situation where you have one piece of a nevela and two pieces of slaughtered meat. So there, we're going to say it's not nullified. And so as a result, we won't know. It'll be a suffix tuma situation if something touches one of the pieces. So yesterday, we tried once.
But are they edible? Are they in any way?
A different question. I mean, you would think that it's the same question, and so it certainly seems like that it would also be with respect to edibleness as well, but it's understood with respect to tuma. Now, with respect to edibleness, right, it may be that it's never edible, and so as a result, it would always be batal, the one and the two, because from an edible perspective, the nevela can't become kosher, and the slaughter piece can't become nevela, and so as a result, you would say that there would be nullification in both instances. At least seems like it what we would say. And so as a result, with the one that's relevant for us is if you have one nevela and two pieces of regular meat, you will be allowed to eat at least one of the pieces, and maybe even two of the pieces, and maybe you'd even be able to eat all three of the pieces. That's a machlokas that isn't in this location. It's the focus of that location, of that machlokas, as to whether you can eat all three is, I believe, machlokas rishonim, but the bottom line is that certainly you'd be able to, we would consider it to be nullified, and if you ate one of the pieces, you're not going to be liable for anything. So yesterday, again, we tried unsuccessfully to prove Rav Chisda, whether Rav Chisda or Rabbi Chanina is correct. Specifically, we tried to support Rabbi Chanina, and based on the first case of our Mishnah. And now we're going to take the next two cases of our Mishnah and try and support, again, the next case is going to be supporting Rav Chisda, and then we're going to try and contradict both of them. But let's take a look and we'll see how. So
just as an opposite, if there was one piece of shchuta mixed with two nevela, you probably would not be able to eat it, right?
Correct. You certainly would not be able to eat it. Well, even if you say that it's Eino Batal, you're still not going to be able to eat it because you don't know which one it is. So that's you're 100%. We're not going to be able to eat it in the other direction. All right. So Tashma, 15 lines up in the narrow lines, basically smack in the middle, 25 lines up from the bottom of the Gemara on Kaf Gimel and Bet. Like I said, we had to stop a little bit early, so let's see if we can get caught up and get to the Mishnah on the top of Kaf Hey Amud Al. So Tashma, Hakometz Shenis Arav. Again, this is the second case of our Mishnah. Again, second case. It's a second bullet point on your screen. Hakometz Shenis Arav Mincha Shelo Nikmitza. If a kometz becomes mixed up with a mincha that has not yet done kamitza, lo yakter, you're not allowed to burn it. Im hikter, if you do burn it, zo shenikmitza also labalim. The one that had done kamitza, the kometz actually works for it, the owner's obligation. But the one that wasn't, that you haven't done any commits on, even though you've now burned it all, and of course it would have included the kamitza and the she'arayim are effectively being burned, we don't say, oh, well, we'll just pretend as if you took the komets. No, you didn't take the komets. And so as a result, the kamitza wasn't done. And therefore, it's not going to fulfill the owner's obligation. But the bottom line is that the kamitza that is less than a single kometz, which is a fistful, is going to be less than a whole mincha, which is at least an isaron, and so as a result, you're going to have a lot more of the non-kosher thing than you have of the kosher thing, and yet we see that it is Aino batal, it's not nullified, and that's why it works. Because if it was all nullified, we would treat it as if it was all a mincha from which a kamitza wasn't taken, and therefore the whole thing would be invalid and not work. So, Mani, who is this? Right, below kamavata lake tivla mlakomets. The tivla, the tevel is just a word for mixed stuff, and so the unkamitzad mincha, which includes both the kamitza and the sharayim, and so that's why it's called tevel. That's going to it's not being nullified. The komitz is not being nullified in that tevel. And so Mani, who is it? So Rabbanan ha'amri olin hu delo mevatli hadadi. When it comes to the rabbis that we saw in the Mishnah back a couple of dapim ago, that we saw that they say that you're not going to nullify things that go on the altar. But this doesn't all go on the altar. The tevel, the mincha from which a kamitza has not been taken, that doesn't go on the altar, and so therefore, according to the rabbis, it should nullify the kamitza. So hamin bimino batel, and so as a result, we're going to say that this is one kind in a like kind, and the rabbis say that min bimino is batel. So why is this an exception? So elapshita Rabbi Yehuda. So it must be that we're following Rabbi Yehuda. So Bishlam Alamanda Amar Basar Mevatel Azlina. Well, according to Rav Chisda, who says that we follow the thing that is nullified, so then everything works out, right? I'm sorry, who follows the things that is doing the nullifying. So that would be, we're following the question that we're asking is, could the unkamitzad mincha become a kamitza? And the answer is, of course. Every element of that mincha has the possibility of being part of the kamitza that we need to take. And so as a result, therefore, that's why it's not going to be nullified, because the greater content could become like the minority content. And so as a result, we say Eino Batel, and therefore the minority is not going to be nullified. And that's why, because the minority part is not going to be nullified, when you burn the whole thing, it's as if you burned the minority part. The minority part retains its existence. But so mevatel having kivatel, right? The nullifying part of it, namely the unkamitzad mincha, could become like the komets, the kol porta chazi mikmatz mine, because every piece of the unkamitzad mincha could become the komets of that mincha. V'habile min b'mino. And so as a result, it's just like a min b'mino case, umin b'mino lo batel, according to Rabbi Yehuda. And you don't do nullification. So Ella Lamanda Amar Basar Batal Aslinan. But according to the one who says we focus on the item that's being nullified, so komets miko havi tivla, can komets become tevel again? No, it cannot. So lema deloka Rabbi Chia, should we say that this is not like Rabbi Chia and therefore is a proof for Rabbi Chanina? I'm sorry. Can we say that this Mishnah is not like Rabbi Chia? And if we're doing that, well, then that shows that Rav Chisda's interpretation of Rabbi Chia has to be correct, and it can't be that Rabbi Chanina is problematic. So no hanami kared de Rabbi Zera. So we have to remember, what did Rabbi Zera say? We'll see it in context, but we cited it yesterday at the end of the day that Rabbi Zera says is that there is a Gzera Shava. And the Gzera Shava is the following. We have the word burning in connection with komets, and we have the word burning, it's actually a commandment not to burn, in connection with Shirayim. And Rabbi Zera says, you know why it says the same word by both of them? It's telling you that just as another komets cannot nullify my komets, because we have this concept that the rabbis have of something that goes on the Mizbeach cannot be nullified, so too with respect to the Shirayim. So as a result, since the Shirayim and the komets can neither of them can nullify another komets, when you combine them together and you have a mincha that from which a kamitza has not yet been taken, it also lacks the ability to nullify a komets, and therefore that's why if you burn the whole thing, it will all work. The komets will work. All right, so now we have tried the middle case of our Mishnah to try and support one or the other of Rav Chisda and Rabbi Chanina. And so now we're going to use the third case and try and contradict both of them. So Tashma, we're now 1, 2, 3, 4 lines up in the narrow lines of the Gemara on Kaf Gimel Amud Bet. Tashma nis'ariv kumsa b'shirayim shel chaverta. If you have a komets that was mixed with the leftover pieces of another mincha, lo yakter, you're not allowed to burn it because you're not allowed to burn the shirayim of the other mincha. But if you did burn it, also labalim. Well, then the one that you the komets that was there, that burning of that komets will fulfill the owner's obligation. But one second, but we have a situation where it's not going to nullify, but everybody should agree that it should be nullified because the komets can't become shirayim and the shirayim can't become komets. So why in the world would anybody, would Rav Chisda or Rabbi Chanina say that there's not bittul here? There should be bittul against everybody. So mani irabanan v'chulu, meaning the Gemara knows the rest of the conversation. The bottom line is that it isn't like the rabbis, and it isn't like Rabbi Yehuda, whether according to Rav Chisda or according to Rabbi Chanina. So it all doesn't fit. So this is where we have the true statement of Amar Rabbi Zera, and we have the statement. Rabbi Zera says the following: Amar Rabbi Zera, nemra haktara bekomets v'nemra haktara b'shirayim. If the Torah says the word burning in connection with the komets because it's supposed to be burned, and the Torah says haktara burning with respect to the shirayim, saying that you're not supposed to burn it, and so as a result, my haktara ha'amura bekomets ein komets mevatel es chaveiro, haktara ha'amura b'shirayim ein shirayim mevatlin es a komets. So just as a komets cannot nullify another komets, the Gzera Shava essentially says that, you know what, Shirayim also can't nullify a komets, and therefore, although in general you would always say that when the majority cannot be like the minority, and the minority cannot be like the majority, you would say that there is bittul. In this case, we are not going to say bittul because we have an explicit Gzera Shava that contradicts it. Okay. So, Tashma, we have a fourth effort to try and support either Rav Chisda or Rabbi Chanina. So let's take a look and see what it says. So,
tell me, what is the bittul again? There is no bittul of what? Of the komets versus the shirayim?
Exactly. The shirayim will not be mevatel the komets, and therefore, if you burn the whole thing, we treat it as if the komets is in existence and is still there, and therefore will fulfill the obligation of the owner.
And that is the komets was burned, essentially. I mean, the komets
yes,
was
exactly. The komets is treated as burned, and therefore, it's all going to work.
And there is still Shirayim, or the Shirayim was burned?
The Shirayim gets burned. So unfortunately, the Kohanim are not going to be eaten. But that's
right.
The assumption of our case. But we're not going to treat the Shirayim as having been mevatel, the komets, and therefore it's as if you burned only Shirayim. right?
Burned,
That's the
burned
key.
only, burned only Shirayim or burned only Komets?
No, no, burned only shirayim. Right, the shirayim is much larger than the komets. The komets is a
Right.
fistful. The shirayim is a big basin full. And so as a result, you're not going to treat that komets as if it was disappeared. And therefore, maybe you would even say, right, if it was truly bottle in the thing, maybe the Kohanim could eat the entire thing because it's all treated as shirayim. The answer is no, we're not going to treat it as shirayim. We're going to treat it as komets, and nobody would be able to eat any of it. All right, but case
It
number
was
four,
burned though.
what?
Didn't we say that the Shirayim was burned in that
No,
case?
that's what actually happened. Remember, the Mishnah says don't burn it. Right? The Mishnah, the third case, the third case of our Mishnah
Right.
says if a kometz gets mixed with the remnants of another mincha, one may not burn it on the altar. Right? You're not supposed to burn it because it
Right.
has shirayim in it. But
But it
if
was
one
burned.
did so, the kometz counts. So the point is that the kometz and the shirayim both retain their existence, and that's why you're not supposed to burn it. But if you do so, it's still going to count.
And
Okay,
there's
so
just
fourth
no
question.
Shirayim to eat. That's all.
Exactly. There's no shiraim to eat. That's right. And we know, as we've seen before, the eating of the shiraim is not ma'akev on there being a good mincha. Tashma tibla beketzach b'shum shimin uvechol mine tavlin kshera. If you now, this is important to see the Rashi. Tibla beketzach. Take a look at the 1, 2 Rashi 5 to 6 lines up. Tivla beketzach isas pesach. What you're doing, what you're adding spices to, tivla beketzach, is you spice it with ketzach or sesame or any other kind of spice. So we're talking about spicing matzah, and the question is that matzah going to be kosher? This is not a practical halacha for us. Our matzah has no spices in it. We do not add any spices because we're concerned about timing. But in any event, but if you did and you were watching and making sure that it did not become chametz, so matzah, it is matzah, and you can eat it on Pesach. Matzahi, it's considered matzah. El shenikrit matzah mesubelas. It's called spiced matzah, and so as a result, I wish that we could do that on Pesach. But all right, kasalka daitach. Well, what's the bottom line? We're gonna say de apish letovlin tfei mimatzah. What happens if you use more spices than you have grains? Than you have matzah. So as a result, even in that case, it seems like it would be matzah. So bishlam alamanda amar basar batal azlinan, that if you follow Rabbi Chanina and say that we're worried about the thing that's being nullified, and can the thing being nullified be like the majority? So batal havik kamivatal. It is possible for the matzah to turn into spices. What do I mean by that? It's possible for once the dilachi mipapsha havile kadablin, because when the matzah spoils, it's not good matzah anymore. You cannot use spoiled matzah to fulfill your mitzvah. And so as a result, once it's spoiled, it's just like spices in that it's not kosher as matzah. And therefore, the matzah that could become like spices, according to Rabbi Chanina, who focuses on the bittul, the item that is nullified, it could become like the nullifiers, and therefore it is not eno batul, and that's why it's going to be kosher matzah, because the matzah itself is not nullified. But elaman amar basar mevatel azlinin. But according to Rav Chisda, who says that we focus on the nullifiers, the nullifying agents, that suggests that the tablin mikahavu matzah, could the spices ever become equivalent to matzah? No, of course not. And so as a result, we have a problem. So no, we don't have a problem. And here's what we're talking about. Yeah, you assumed that the spices were more than the matzah, but we could just say that this brisa is talking about where the spices are less than the matzah, and so the matzah remains the majority. And deruba matzahi v'lo batla. It's mostly matzah and not nullified. Daikanami kadani, and you can actually show that that's probably the case, because what does the end of that brisa say? Matzahi. It's matzah. Elish and nikras matzah misubelas. It's called spice matzah. Shmamina. That really shows that in fact we're really saying that the majority is matzah. All right. So that was our first discussion. And so as a
It's like
result,
saying the shame gorem. The Gemara of in other places shame gorem. So if we're calling it spice matzah, the eker is the matzah, not the spice.
exactly, exactly. But more than that, it's telling us that there's majority matzah there.
Right.
But along that exact line. That's exactly right. All right. So so now and by the way, it does seem based on the notes in the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, it does seem that we follow Rav Chisda, that we say nevela betela b'shchuta, that a nevela would be batal if you had the shechted pieces, but not the other way around. And so as a result, we focus on the nullifying agents. Can they be like the item that is being nullified? All right, so Kisalik Rav Kahana. So now Rav Kahana went up and he went to Eretz Yisrael from Bavel. Ashkechinu livnei Rabbi Chia to Yosve v'Kamri. He saw the sons of Rabbi Chia, and they were talking in learning and asking the following question: Isaron shechilku. If you have an isaron, which is what you need in order to make a mincha, and you put it into halves, v'heinichu bevisa, and then you put it into the mixing bowl where you're going to be able to take the kamitza. And now here, take a look in Rashi. The elu shnei hachatzain ein nogan zelazeh. The top Rashi on Kaf Daled Amud Aleph, as we're now on Kaf Daled Amud Aleph, that these two piles, these two halves, are not touching each other. V'naga tvul yom be'echad mehen. And now a tvul yom touches one of them. Now a tvul yom is, for most purposes, tahor. But when it comes to Kodesh, he's not tahor, and he is considered tameh until nightfall. And so, as a result, when he touches something, it's going to make touches this mincha. It's going to make the mincha incapable of being offered. So, but the key question is, what about the other half of the mincha? Do we say that both halves are considered tameh because they're not touching, but they are in the same bowl? Now, it's important to note that this bowl is made of metal because we're talking about a kli shares. If it were made out of pottery, when you have something tameh in the airspace of a pottery container, everything in that airspace becomes tameh. But that's not true with respect to a metal bowl. So let's take a look. So Mahu, what do we say about this? Do we say, as Rashi puts it, end of the first line, mi nitma chavero olo? Do we treat the other half as also being tameh? So, and specifically, Kitnan, when we had the Mishnah, and this is a Mishnah in Chagiga Daf Kaf Amud Bet, Kli Mitzaref Masha B'Tocha L'Kodesh, that when it and this Mishnah is talking about a case of Tuma, that a klishares, a vessel that's from the Beis Hamikdash, will combine within it everything for Kodesh. So Hani Mili Heika Denage Bahadadi. Maybe we could say that that's only when the things that are inside are touching each other, but they're separate items. And so even though they're separate items, because they're touching, and when you touch the first one, it effectively makes the whole thing of equal tuma level, and it's all going to be tameh. Because one of the key differences between a tvul yom and somebody who's actually tameh is that when something is touched by a tvul yom, it does not have the ability of creating further levels of tameh. It is called psul, and therefore cannot make anything else tameh. It's sort of like the lowest level it goes immediately to the lowest level of tuma. But if in fact if something were to be tameh that touches it, it would be a sheni latuma, and then a shlishi latuma, etc. But maybe when the things inside this vessel are not touching one another, we would not say that they all become the same level of tuma. Or maybe again, it doesn't make a difference whether things are touching. So Amr lahu ihu. So Rav Kahana, who heard the beginning of this conversation, joins in and he says, Mi tanan kli mechaber. Does that Mishnah say that that it's going to join them, meaning join them as if they are already touching, and then it's just connecting one to the next? No, kli mitzarif tanan. kolduhu. It's combining, which suggests under any circumstances, even if they're not touching. So as a result, Rav Kahana has answered their question, and the bottom line is if a tvul yom touches pile A in the kli and not pile B, but they're all part of the same korban, well then it's all going to be tameh. Hoshit echad lebeinehem. Well, what happens now? The sons of Rabbi Chia continue to ask questions. What happens if you stick your hand between them? Mahu. Rashi helps us understand this question. Hoshit, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 lines down in Rashi. Chatzi isaron echad lebein hanach chatzi isaron. So you stick your hand between the two piles that you've now created that are going to somehow transfer the tuma between them. So do we say that that transfer is happening through the airspace between them because they're all in the same vessel, or is it happening through the floor of the vessel essentially? So Mahu, what do you say about that? So do we say, and next Rashi, im naga tvul yom bezeh Mahu sheyitma oto otan shnayim. Do we say that that the other one is also going to be tameh, or because does the hand block the tuma? So Amar lahu tzarich l'kli kli mitzarfo ein tzarich l'kli ein kli mitzarfo. So the bottom line is that if something needs the vessel's going to combine it, and so as a result, it's not going to be. I apologize. I read that Rashi wrong. Hoshit echad lebeinehem is not sticking your hand in between them, but you put a third pile between them. So Hoshit chatzi isaron echad lebein hanach chatzei isaron, that you put a third pile of a half isaron. Now this is from a second mincha. Remember, the first two piles A and B, are both from the same mincha, and you separated them, and now you put them into the vessel in two separate piles. And we said that if a tvul yom touches pile 1, then pile 2 also becomes tameh.
Well, that must be by airspace then, right?
Well, no, not necessarily, because what we're going to say now is you have pile A, pile B, and you put pile C, which is from another mincha, you put it between them. And what Rav Kahana says back is, tzarich l'kli, kli mitzarfo. What actually needs to be combined in this vessel? In order for the mincha to be a valid mincha, you need combination of A and B. And so as a result, even though C is in the middle of the two, and even though C is in the same vessel, when the tvul yom touches A, B becomes tameh, but C does not become tameh. And let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi helps us out.
But does C touch B or A? Or
no,
both of
it's
them?
not. No, they're not touching. And none of the three piles are touching. You have A, C in the middle, and B. And none of the three piles are touching. And the tvul yom touches pile A because pile A and pile B are part of the same korban. And they're in the container in order to combine the two as part of the same korban. If you touch part A, part B becomes tameh. But part C, that's in the middle and from a different korban, doesn't matter. It does not become tameh. Nothing happens to it. As Rashi tells us, ein tzarich l'kli kigon hai chatzi itzaron shlishi. Like this third half an isaron. De ein tzarich l'kli. It has no need to be in this vessel. Daha eino mitzaref im elu. It's not combining with either of the other halves. Lemincha achat. To become one mincha. Ein hakli mitzarfo. And so in that instance, the kli does not combine them. The toarin harishonim. And so as a result, if you were to touch that middle one, the other two would remain tahor. And so as a result, that is not going to convey tuma to the others. So that's question number 2. Third question.
But how do we make this? But he's touching one of them, A or B. How are we saying that the other one becomes tummy? Especially now that there's a wall in between you.
Because we have the concept of kli mitzaref. that the point is that when it comes to the holy vessels in connection with Kodesh, if you're in a holy vessel that is intended to combine your piece one and piece two, even if they're not touching, everything happens to both of them together. So if you touch one part, the other part becomes tamei as well. Because with a tvul one yom would be touch one part, the other part becomes puzzle, just like the first part, because the vessel itself combines them.
So these two pieces of komets, whatever they are, mincha, they're supposed to go together. They're supposed to be combined. They were separated for whatever
It's
reason.
exactly. It's this
So,
is
so,
all pre
so
kamitza mincha. Pre
right.
kamitza
So
mincha.
if these two piles were not in the vessel yet, if he touched one, would the other one become tummy?
No.
Okay.
And we're going to get that great question because the Gemara is going to even talk about that case about what happens if it becomes tame before you put it in the vessel and then you put it in the vessel. And the answer to that question is it's not tame yet. It's not tame. The tuma doesn't transfer through the vessel unless it becomes tame in the vessel. So
Okay.
we're going to see
Okay.
that shortly. So hoshet tvul yom as etzba'o beinehem. What happens if the tvul yom sticks his finger in the airspace between them? So mahu. What's the law? Meaning, if he sticks it in the airspace, as Rashi says, ba'aviran, in the airspace, v'lo naga lo bahen v'lo b'kli, and he doesn't touch the vessel or the two halves. So Amar lahu. Ein lecha davar shemitame ma'aviro ela kli cheres bilvad. The only thing where the airspace matters is if it's an earthenware vessel. This is not an earthenware vessel because it's a kli shares, it's a metal vessel, and so as a result, it's going to not do anything. So hadar ihu ba minayu. So as a result, Rav Kahana now turns around and asks the sons of Rav Chia a question, highlighting that sometimes you may know something that the teacher knows, and the teacher, the teacher and students are interchangeable. Sometimes a teacher can be the student as well. So he asks the following: Hadar iu baminayu mahu likmotz mizeh al zeh. What's the halacha if I take a kamitza from half one for the whole thing? And it's not combined in a single pile, and they're not even touching. So, do Tzeiruf Dauraisa O Durabanan? Is this combination that we're saying exists in this Kli? Is it biblical? So, as a result, it's as if you have one pile, and therefore the Kamitza is a valid Kamitza. Or is it rabbinic? Meaning, is it just the rabbis are concerned about them touching, and therefore they say that when it comes to tuma, it's going to transfer, but when it comes to actually fulfilling a biblical obligation, it will not work. So that's the question. So Amru lo, Zolo Shamanu. We didn't know, we never heard this specifically, but Kayotzava Shamanu. But we heard a similar case. So maybe this will answer your question. Ditnan, Shnei Menachot, Shalom Nikmitzu V'nis Arvuzo Bezo. We saw this Mishnah, this was a Mishnah back on Kaf Bet Amud Aleph, that we have two menachos that are that become mixed with one another. Im yachol likmotz mizo b'fnei atzma umizo b'fnei atzma ksherot. If you can take a kamitza from this one and from that one separately, they're valid. And what are we thinking at the moment? We're thinking that there are effectively three piles. There's a pile of only mincha one. There's a pile that's Mincha 1 and Mincha 2 combined, and there's a pile of Mincha 2 alone. And we're thinking that they're all separate and not attached to one another. And so as a result, V'im Lav, but if you cannot do that, Psulot, it's all going to be invalid. Ki yachol likmotz miyak sherut. But yet we see that if you can do the kamitza, it's kosher. Amai, why is it? Hachta ma'arav ha lo naga. Don't we have to say that the part that is mixed together is not touching either part one or mincha 2? So, no, you don't have to say that. And therefore, because it's not touching, clearly when you take from the mincha 1 only, you are fulfilling the obligation also with respect to the part of Mincha 1 that is mixed with Mincha 2. And when you take from Mincha 2 only, you're fulfilling also from the part of Mincha 2 that is mixed with Mincha 1, and they're not touching. And so therefore everything is okay. And doesn't that show that you can take a kamitza from part 1 even if it's not touching to part 2? So no, Amarava Dilma Bagushin Hamachulakin Hasuyin Kamasreg. No, maybe it's like a comb where you have sort of like a circle, right? I mean, basically, you could do this on a line, right? Where you have the right side is all one, the left side is all two, and then they bleed together. You know, there are a couple different ways you can understand this comb reference. Either they bleed together, meaning like the tines of a comb that go into one another. And so therefore there's a part that is mixed together, or you can view it like two prongs of a comb where you have the end of one prong is only one, the end of the prong two is only two, and the middle that connects the two prongs, that's the combination. So there are two different ways that you can read this, but the bottom line is that you can say that they are all touching, and therefore this is not a definitive proof. So mihavilai. So what's the conclusion? So Rava tries to bring his own proof. Tashma, Titania, Veherim mimenu. We have a baraisa that says that you need to separate the komets from it. What is the implication? Min hamachubar, that it has to be attached. Shelo yavi isaron b'shnei kelim v'yikmots, and that it's telling us specifically this brisa that you cannot use the isaron in two vessels and do kamitza in one of them. So what's the implication? Why does it say specifically two vessels in this brisa? But if you were to bring it all in one vessel, but it was similar to two vessels in that it was two separate piles, kamitz, you could do kamitza. So isn't that a good proof? No, Amrle Abaye, that's also not a good proof. Okay, why? Dilma shnei kalim hechidami. What's the case of two kalim? Imagine that you have a cup in a bowl. Okay, a cup in a bowl. And imagine that the rims of the cup and the rims of the bowl are the same height. Okay, and so now what you have is, and the cup is inside the bowl because the bowl is wider. And so as a result, you pour the isaron and it flows over the rim of the inner cup into the outer bowl. And so as a result, in that situation, you can say that's the situation. Kagon kafiza bekaba. You have a kafiza inside something that holds a kav. So something that's smaller inside something that holds a larger amount. Now you have the in the end you have everything piled up, and so as a result it's all touching. But the pieces that are touching are above the walls of both the cup and the bowl. So kevam demifsak mechitzasa kafiza mitata. So because the wall of the inner cup is separating everything below the rim of the outer bowl, it's not going to work. You can't take a kamitza from one and use it for the other. It's not as if you have one combined thing. But but maybe when you have two vessels that are similar to one vessel that's similar to two vessels, could go an areva asa shel tarnagolin, like a trough for chickens, where you have dividers, but the dividers don't reach the height of the outer wall. So then, even though those dividers are doing some division between the parts, Hanagia, everything is touching, and it's all below the rim of the vessel, and therefore it's all going to be good, and you can do one kamitza even though there are partitions in it. Aval hacha delo nagia klal tibailach. But if they're not touching at all, maybe you can't derive the lesson from that, and so as a result, we are left. This proof is also rejected, and we're left without a proof at all. Okay, so and so we do not have a definitive proof, and we now turn to the next question. So
what were we trying to prove again?
We were trying to prove whether if I take, again, we have one bowl, the mincha has been divided into two halves, and the two halves are not touching, and I take a kamitza from half number one, is that a good kamitza or not? And in the end, we have not proven one way or the other, because the question is does the bowl's combination status, is that a biblical status? So therefore it works totally, or is it only a rabbinic status? And so therefore it's only going to convey tuma and make things puzzle, but it's not going to make things kosher. And we don't answer the question. So now we're going to, again, we're dealing with now three different pieces. We're going to have two halves and a third piece that's separate. And let's see what the story is. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the following question. Tseruv Kli, if you have two halves that are connected through the combination of the vessel, and so you touched half A, part A, and then it became part B, became Tameh, because it's all in the same vessel. And now you have Bechibur Mayim, and you have part B is connected to part C through a flow of water. So if you have a stream of water going, let's say you're pouring it on B, and from B it then goes as a flow to C, even though B and C are not themselves touching, the water is touching both of them at the same time. So Mahu, what do we say about that? Do we say that the connection that is existing in the bowl is so strong that it's as if the piece B that has now become Tameh because a Tful Yom touched piece A, that it's just like piece A, and therefore it's just like a Tful Yom touches piece B, and the flow goes to C, and so as a result, C is also Tameh. Or no, do we say that A and B are Tameh because of the special rule of Tzeruf, but the rule of Tzeruf is not going to then continue the flow out of the pot? That wouldn't work. So that's the question. So kitnan, as we said, now explaining it inside, kitnan, when we learned in the Mishnah, in Maseches Chagigo, Daf Kaf Amabet, Kli Mitzaref, Masha B'Tokol Kodesh, that the vessel combines when it comes to the holy things, Hani Mili de Gavai, the gavai, that's talking about when it's inside. Aval devarai, lo, but when it's outside, no. Odilma, kaven to mechaber, or does we say no? It's connected. It's connected from B to C with the water. It's connected. So imtim say lomer, and if you say kaven to mechaber, that once it's connected. What if you do it in the opposite order? What if you have that same setup, but now you touch C? Chibur mayim v'tziruf kli. Do we go in the other direction? Obviously, C will make B tameh, but is the tuma that B gets through that siruf, is that sufficient to be a siruf that will also now make, with the vessel, make A tameh as well? So ma'u kitanan klimat saref hani mili dinaga migavai aval mibarai lo. When we say that they're going to combine, it's because the touching happened inside the vessel. We know that if you touch it outside the vessel and then put it in the vessel, that's not going to be enough. So is this like touching and then putting in the vessel, or is this like it's as if you touched it in the vessel, or Dilma Loshna, or maybe it's not different? Teku, we do not resolve this question. So, Boimine Rava. Now,
where's the water? Is the water inside the kli?
The water is flowing from it doesn't even have to be inside the kli. It could be bouncing off, and essentially it's a flow touching the second pile, and then going from the second pile to a third pile that is outside the vessel.
So how is there a canal?
Well, yes, the simplest way to imagine it is imagine a canal. Imagine that the pile inside the vessel is sufficiently high that it goes over the rim of the vessel, and you have like two channels of a canal. You almost have to set this up on purpose in order to make this work. But and you have water flowing down a canal, touching the pile, and then flowing from the pile, continuing on in a new canal, going into piece C. and that's all. And so that's how you have this set this whole structure up.
Is
Bottom
C
line is
inside
not
the and C inside the pot, the
C is not inside the pot.
outside? So
That's
there's a
outside the pot.
hole, then there would be a hole in this vessel from which the water flows outside to sea, right?
No, no, you could just imagine again, imagine a big pile, right? A big pile that's in a vessel. So the big pile, you have a tube channel coming to the pile and a tube, a straw leaving the pile. Obviously, it's from a higher elevation to a lower elevation, and it leaves the pile, goes over the rim of the pot, and then spills out onto pile C.
Well,
So
that's
that
against gravity. So there would have to be
no, no, it's not
a
against gravity.
suction.
It doesn't have to be against gravity. First of all, there are ways that you could structure it so that like a roller coaster, right? It could go down, and then because of enough gravity having given it enough force, it will have enough momentum to then go back up the hill a little bit. So
So
there
then
are
either
ways.
you need a suction device or you need a pump to pump it to enable the water to go down and
Totally
up
fine.
again.
So say that there's a pump. Absolutely, it could be right. The second thing is, as you noted, right, when I've never done it, but you see it on the cartoons all the time. If you begin to suck right the gasoline out of a
Right.
car,
A
even
siphon.
though you know
Siphon.
you get enough suction, it's going to go against gravity. So we could deal again. There are ways to deal with it. The bottom line is that it's a single flow of liquid of water from B to C. How we structure that is not really what's relevant. It is physically possible to structure it, and that's the situation of our question. So all right, but we
I
got to
just
get moving.
wonder then if you've got
Oh my
water.
gosh, we're not
I
going
know,
to
I
even
know. If the
finish half of
water's
the doc. I'm
dripping in
sorry.
there,
We
I
got to get moving.
I
This
don't
is
know.
by Rabbi Yirmiyah. I'm happy to stay as long as you. I can't stay. It's today's Wednesday. So by Rabbi Yirmiyah, Seirav Kli v'Chibur Mayim. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question the following way: what if the combination again is you have so again, that's the situation. We haven't answered the question. Oh no, we did. We did. I'm sorry. We take. We left it with a take. So my apologies. So by Rava. So we're at the two dots on Kaf Dalad Amud Aleph. So by Rava, Isaron shechilku v'nidma echad mehem. If you have an Isaron that's divided into two halves, and one half becomes tamei, v'henichu bevisa, and now you put it in the mixing bowl. V'chazer tvul yom v'naga ba'osa tamei, and now you have um, So again, this is the case that you were just talking about, where it became tame outside the kli, and now you put it into the kli. V'chazar tvul yom v'naga ba'oso tame, and now the tvul yom comes and touches the one that's tame. Mahu mi amrin and sava lo tuma olo. Do we say that because it was already tame and this touching does nothing, that it's effectively already satiated with the tuma, and therefore nothing happens? So Amar le Abaye umi amrin and sava le tuma. Do we say that there's an idea of satiation of tuma? Of course not. The tvul yom touched it. It's in the same pot. The tuma should transfer. V'hatanan, and moreover, I have a mishnah that shows that we don't say that there's satiation. Sudden tame. If you have a sheet that is tame midras, and now we're on kaf dalon mabet, v'aso vilon, and you turn it into a curtain. Now the rules of tame midras is that if you're sitting on, if it's something to be sat on, and a zav sits on it, even if it's not being touched, if there are cushions, for example, and you have the pile of 10 cushions, and the zav only sits on pile number 1 at the very top, pile number 10 at the bottom is also going to be tamei midras, and that tuma is so strong that it's considered an avatuma, not a rishon latuma, and it's considered an avatuma, and so therefore it has the ability to make other things, and specifically people, tamei. So as a result, but if you turn this sheet that was to sit on into a curtain, it is no longer aso vilon, and you make it into a curtain, tahar min midras. It is no longer tamei midras, aval tamei maga midras, but it is tamei as if it touched a midras, as if it touched something that was tuma, had tumas midras. Amar Rabbi Yossi be'eza midras naga bazeh. What did it touch? Now, of course, the Tanakama would say that it touched itself, but Rabbi Yossi is like, but you don't touch yourself. That's not a thing that we think about. So ela she'im naga bo hazav tame maga hazav. If the zav had touched it, well, then it would be tame to the zav's touching. Now, The truth is that tuma of a zav touching is a lower level of tuma than tumas midras, and yet we're saying that the zav who touched this thing that was tame midras was also made it tuma zav. And so, doesn't that show, as Abaye says, that there is no idea of satiated with tuma? So no, kinaga boz zav mia tame. And sorry, this is still part of Abaye's point. And so when the zav touched it, it was already tame. Va'afilu libasof, meaning even if he touched it after he laid on it. So amai lema sava lev tuma. According to you, Rava, you should say that it already associated with tuma. So Amarle umimaida hai sheim nagabo hazar levasar midras dilma makame midras. Maybe he touched it beforehand, and so that's the situation about it. Dahavya tuma chamura al tuma kala. So as a result, the more machmir tuma of tuma midras is on the tumas of the lighter tuma of touching. Aval hacha deidi veidi tuma kala. But in a case where they're both light, low, maybe not. That we're not done. Oh my gosh, we are so far behind. We are not done with the with this idea of Tuma Midras and Tuma's Maga, but we have got to stop now, and so we will continue with that, God willing, tomorrow. We have more questions, more answers. Oh my gosh, I apologize that we fell so far behind. Looking forward to continuing our learning tomorrow.